last time we had breakfast. But, I actually have no issue with the taxes I pay. I just would like a little bit more clarity on where they're going, how they're being spent. It's the same sort of thing.
Sure.
The charitable dollar is very much the same. It goes into this place and you don't know what percentage of it. There's a claimant of some certain percentage, but you don't actually see its breakdown.
Right.
So the evidence provides so much clarity for people. And I know a lot of people don't want to read it, but those that do, it changes the narrative of whether they're suspicious of something or not.
Right. And I think, we had a broader conversation when you and I met for, which we kind of hit things off on. But the view that in our world, sometimes you see some people that are very one-dimensional about their approach to the investments and the dollars. But there's a lot of room for people who want to actually do right by the clients and do well. And the charity part is a big part of it as well, because there are a lot of people who get to a point in their life where they want to give certain money away, and it's actually really hard to give money away. Like, it's not that easy. It's an odd sort of thing to say, but sometimes you want to do certain things, but just the logistics of giving the money away is not straightforward.
No, look, you've hit the nail on the head, and I think a lot of what we've been trying to do at Grayhawk is solve some of more of these intangible issues. I would love to say that our portfolio is vastly differentiated, and I think there's a lot of things that we do very, very well. But having said that I'm also a believer in mean reversion. So over very long cycles, you can have periods of outperformance and periods of underperformance. And, there isn't a large discrepancy for a portfolio that would look similar to ours across a large subset of other wealth managers or whatever you might call. But to your point, I think focusing on the idea of the holistic element of wealth and how closely it is tied to purpose and mental health and commitment and leadership and education and so many exceptional things. The U.S. obviously has many challenges, but one of the things that they really know how to do well is give. And there's a huge incentive, not just from a tax perspective, but from the overall view of giving. And I think in Canada, we are still very suspicious, and there isn't the same incentive structure, and the dollars given in this country relative to the United States on income are a fraction. And some of it is a tax rate that's materially higher here versus there. But also, I think it's really a mindset. And some of that is humility-based. People don't really want to show in that way, whereas maybe that's less of a concern in the United States. But in Canada, I do believe that there's a great opportunity to be able to connect with families and help them find their purpose with their wealth. And at the end of the day, if you can design a portfolio that substantiates what their philosophy and belief and goals are, then you're really solving for an outcome rather than focusing on the vagaries of day to day and how does that compare relative to some benchmark on a short-term horizon, which is where most people default to because there isn't the discussion around the holistic nature of their money.
Sure. I want to sort of go back a little bit to your story, because I've talked briefly to some of my colleagues about how you even got started in this industry, and then sort of come back to this point, if you don't mind. But can you give me a little bit of a background on how you got into it? Because I found it pretty interesting that you were interested in it from a very, very young age.
I was. Look, I got really lucky, and I start by maybe saying that I'm dyslexic, so I'm a very slow reader. I still am to this day. I've found cheat sheets and forms that enable me to sort of speed those processes up. Numbers have always come quite naturally to me, so I've been able to think quite empirically throughout my life. And I would say, as I've mentioned to you in the past, that Audible has changed my life, because what I've begun to realize is that it's just the input mechanism. I can actually digest a lot of information. I just need it to come in a form in which I can comprehend it best. And so I read literally by having someone read to me with great regularity. So whether it's podcasts or books, it's been a life changer for me. And again, some of the evolution of time, it's a big thing. But yeah, I bought my first stock when I was 14 years old. My grandfather was a very interested investor, and he was very good to me. He was very smart, and he sort of instilled a bit of a philosophy. around my thinking and what I need to do. And so I was also very fortunate in that my mom gave me a lot of responsibility at a young age. And so I helped her a lot with, started out being just the finances of the house, but then she let me kind of oversee her portfolio for her.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. Look, you learn a lot. And when you're 14 years old, what you learn is that you're bound to make a lot of mistakes, for which I inevitably did. But the great thing about mistakes is that investing is one of the few places where if you actually learn from the mistake and try not to repeat it, and sometimes you will, but if you try not to repeat it, you have an arc that's materially different, because investing has so much behavioral element to it. People have this sense of urgency to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. They want to sell when things are down, and they want to buy when things are high. And all of these things are conditions that happen when you've not experienced anything. But when you've experienced a lot of things, you can sort of control your emotions in a more beneficial way.
You're a lot more measured.
Yeah, you can be a lot more measured in things. And I would definitely say that probably the biggest advantage I've ever had is I grew up on the East Coast. I'm from Halifax originally. And that is a culture of humility. And I often joke that if you don't possess humility on the East Coast, it's physically beaten into you. And I really believe that to be true. But mostly what it enables you is that there's a great room for error, because people are forgiving, because everyone makes mistakes. And so I came to Toronto when I was 23 years old, and I was fortunate to go through this rotational program at Scotia Capital Markets. And I would tell you that really the only distinct advantage I had is that I'd been investing for a long time. I'd made a lot of mistakes, and I'd learned a lot along the way. And when you compare that to the number of people that I was sort of competing with, they were largely people that had grown up in privilege and had been told their whole life that they're really great at everything they do. They'd never really taken a risk of any significance that put them in a place where they had to admit error. And if they did admit error, there was usually somebody very close by to be able to catch them before the error actually manifested into anything substantial. And so it sounds crazy, but in some ways, having been through a little bit of pain, and that's really the path to prosperity in investing, is to have had some pain, I was able to take that as an opportunity to really harness some skills that others didn't have. So it took them a long time to catch up to where I already was. Mm-hmm. And, Warren Buffett says this all the time, but if you want to be a great investor, drop 50 IQ points. And I think that there's something to be said for that, because you have to be really careful about overthinking things, not really realizing that it's a probabilistic decision that you're making. And the more information you can amass, it reduces the overall risk of the probability you're assuming. But the reality is that there can be a point where you're just doing extra work, where it's really more noise than signal.
Right.
And the reality is that you can get caught offside pretty quickly and make an easy decision a very hard one.
I think you touched on two things that I always find fascinating. One is your relationship with mistakes. You repeated that many, many times. And I think that's key, because there's some people have an unhealthy relationship with mistakes. And I love the way you kind of brought that up throughout your conversation. Like, at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. You don't want to make the same mistake twice, and you don't want to make mistakes that could have been avoidable. Like, you don't want to misspell somebody's name on an email like that. I'm not talking about that mistake.
No.
But when you actually do your best and you have good intentions and something doesn't go well, it doesn't need to be this earth-shattering, life-ending kind of a situation. It's like, it is what it is. And I feel like, more organizations need to empower their team to make mistakes. And that's something that when I work closely with people, I try and convey, is that, look, do your best, don't make mistakes on silly things, but if you make a mistake, it is what it is. We'll deal with it, and we'll rectify it, and we'll move forward. And obviously you need to say that to the right people, so I don't want that to be taken out of context, but I love your relationship with that. And I love the relationship with overthinking and what you call like the busy work, essentially, because a lot of times too, you'll see this all the time. And I used to see this when I was in university, actually quite a bit, is when people were studying, they would take notes off the books, and then they would take cue cards and make notes off their own notes, and then they would highlight it. And it's like, okay, you put in like 30 hours to condense and rewrite the content. But like, if you had just taken a fraction of that time and just read what you needed to read, or went to the right class, you probably didn't need to do that. And seeing the difference between the busy work versus actual effective work is something that's been a big deal in our lives as well, especially in building this business. Because I hear people talk about building businesses, and that's something I'd like to talk to you about, because it's sort of it has universal appeal. But sometimes when people are building businesses, they spend so much time on what I would consider just busy work, like an insane amount of time designing the perfect colors and whatnot. It's like, look, unless you're in some kind of a fashion related business, like, it's fine. You can upgrade your logo later, but let's get to the real meat and potatoes here. You know what I mean? And I like what you said about the investing and not getting too caught up in the noise and the busy work. Just do the fundamentals. And before, I don't think I was recording, but we were talking about doing acquisitions. And you said something very helpful to me, which was stay focused on the end goal, the prize, and if it's strategically in line with what you had in mind, don't get too caught up in the speed bumps that come along that are inevitable. So it's like, to me, those are some principles, whether it's your relationship with mistakes or your ability to focus on the real content as opposed to the noise. And I think that there's some real universal appeal to that, regardless of what you do in life.
Yeah, look, I agree with most everything you said. It's kind of that adage of, most kids study, but they haven't learned how to study. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, it's one of the great skills that you can offer your children is to know how to learn, because learning is also a skill. It's not just what you're learning, but how you're learning. And I think investing is very much the same thing. The amount of time that people place on things that just don't matter is staggering. Right. And it's not that they're doing it with any intentionality. It's that they don't know the difference between noise and signal. Right. And again, as I said earlier, you really only learn it through pain and pleasure. And so, and there's I can't remember the quote from Morgan Housel, but it's something like, there's no tailwind that we don't acknowledge and no headwind that we don't reassign blame. And it's very true, like we're human. And so it's easy for us to take acceptance for things that really were just blind luck, and record them as a check mark to our own capabilities and competencies. And then, very quickly that can revert on you, and all of a sudden you can reassign blame to a much larger mass of people with which to share. And I think, part of the element of that you said earlier is that there's not a lot of learnings in that for you. What there is there's sort of a pivot or an adjustment that lacks intellectual honesty or self-awareness or whatever it might be. I have 4 sons, as you know, and they're all different. They're all terrific. I'm proud of every single one of them. But they all come at things differently. And I recognize that there are so many skills that people have. So passion allows you to find something in yourself and push yourself in a way that others can't or won't. For me, it was investing, and it could have been anything else, but I was lucky to find it early. Some people, it takes way longer to find that in their life, and some people never find it. When I look at you, I can see the intensity and passion with which you love what you do and what you're trying to solve for. And you have a very clear vision for what that is. And it's not ephemeral. It's not imaginary. It is very specific. And that goal orientation is probably, that provides the focal point to be able to lead a group of people. And, even in the last few years of being with Grayhawk, we've made lots of mistakes along the way, my goodness. But the reality is that we've done a lot of things really well. And much of it has had to do with having some good people. My partner Mike is terrific. He's incredibly capable. He has skills that I could only dream of. And I think that that's another element, finding people that can do things that are just so vastly better than you. But when I look at the sort of arc of my life and my career, most of it is being in the right place at the right time and working really, really hard and not ever being able to time the right place and right time. It's that perpetual nature of getting up, going through the grind every day,
Right.
and then having some inevitable tailwinds that arise, because most things that people do in life, they will arrive at a point of really great tailwind and a really, really challenging point of headwind. And that's just the arc of anything that we do in life.
Right.
And
How much of it do you think is luck?
well, I would say, look, I was born a white male to really educated family in sort of, call it a middle upper class family on the East Coast. I've had really, really good friendships in my life that have kept me very grounded. I'm married to an amazing partner. When you start adding all that into the equation, of which most of it is luck, I think that almost every output that I have had in my life has really been luck.
That's how I see it.
So I don't know, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that as well. But I think what I would say is that, I say to my children all the time, one of the things that's most important about you working hard in this life is that you've been afforded so much privilege that you really owe it to those that just didn't win the lottery that you did.
Exactly.
To work your ass off, to contribute, to find a way to make sure that whatever your successes are get shared back into the community, whether they be education or financial or whatever they are. Because there's nothing worse than someone that has generated excessive amounts of good fortune, largely wealth, that do nothing with it.
Right.
And when you sit on your backside, there's not a whole lot of contribution to be made.
Yeah, I agree. I think 100%, first of all, it's a responsibility to give back. I really think what you use, I quite literally use the same terms, lottery tickets. I feel the same, just to being born healthy, with the right mind and the right body, to the right family, for me moving to the right country, have the right opportunities. All of that is so big in terms of their impact in my life. I kind of see it as like I've already won all these lottery tickets.
Exactly.
And at best what I'm doing is cashing it in.
That's exactly
it's like, and so the notion of then creating some kind of an opportunity or a positive in this world, however that may be, is an absolute must. Like, I think people like yourself and me have been born with so much red in our ledgers that, we can work the rest of our life and we'll never be in the black, just because we've been, so fortunate with so many things. And the right timing and the right place. I mean, Warren Buffett says this too. Like, if he had been born same guy, but like 300 years ago in the middle of a war or something, how much success was he going to have, right?
Well, I think the quote is, he said, if I was born in a tribe in Africa running around screaming, I'm a great capital allocator, it wouldn't have mattered very much. And the fact is it's very true. You're spot on. I mean, your lot in life is that is the blessing, the recognition of it, having people around you. I know this has been the same for you and your family, but having people that will motivate you so that you understand the good fortune and you don't confuse it for some set of skill that you really didn't possess.
Right. Yeah, like you can't believe your own hype, right? Like,
No.
and sometimes you see people get too caught up. But I'm curious on one thing you said. A lot of people have been kind enough in meeting me and hearing me talk about the business or our team to use the word passionate. Mm-hmm. And I am very passionate about it. And I appreciate that. But what's interesting to me is that as much as I think I'm a pretty good programmer and I love our business, for me, it was never like I need to be in the investment industry or I need to be a programmer. I think what I'm passionate about is just maximizing my potential in some way. And I feel like if I had gone into a business doing landscaping, I would have been passionate about landscaping because that would have been my game. That would have been my like I feel like some people are very specifically and acutely passionate about the investment industry or about technology, for instance. I don't feel that that's been me, but I am extremely interested in the idea of building a business and doing my best and working with great people and having a great team and going out and competing. All of those things have tremendous appeal to me. So I suppose it is passion, but in maybe a different lens of it. And it's not that I dislike this industry or
No.
technology, but I mean I could see myself. It was never like, oh my god, I love programming so
Yeah.
much. It was just it was a tool. It was means
Of
to an
course.
end. But how much do you think that is a factor in, like, when you speak to, say, your sons or younger individuals that seek your advice? How do you feel they should weigh that passion? Because there are some people who have passions that may be less practical.
Commercial.
Yes. Okay. Better way of putting it.
Yeah, very much.
You know? And now some people may be in a situation where they come from certain families where they're afforded that opportunity to pursue something that may not be, as you said, commercial. But how do you balance that? What's your view of that?
Well, it's interesting, my wife is a very accomplished academic, but she's also a GP. And so she's been a family doctor for, I think, 16 years now, and she's amazing at it. She has devoted her life to the health and well-being of others, and it's with great admiration. I think there are some challenging days. I think it's a lot of hard work. I think it's a thankless job. I think, commercially, it makes zero sense at all, to use that as a great example.
Sure.
And that's sort of tragic in the grand scheme of it all. But it's given her great purpose in her life. And so I think it's also very intentional. And that really resonates for me. For my boys, it isn't so much of go make money, but it is much more about you need to find, that holy trinity of the Venn diagram, what you love, what you're good at, and what you get paid for. And that intersection of those three pieces, that's it. That's what you're seeking. Now, it doesn't have to maximize on every element.
Right.
But you do need to find those things, because the reality is that if you don't love it, you're never going to be good at it, which means you're not going to make any money. If you're solely focused on money, it means someone who's good at it and loves it is going to usurp you at some stage, and you're not going to make the money. It's easy to see that the construct requires these three things. And so, I use my wife as an example, but it could be lots of other people. She's way smarter than I am. She's definitely much better looking than I am. She contributes way more to the world holistically than I do. She could have done anything or been anything, and she chose a path that wasn't very commercial economically. And I'm very fortunate that the thing I loved aligned very well with commerciality.
Right.
And I'm probably commercial because those two intertwine. And like you said, passion plays a role in it. I didn't necessarily follow my passion, I wouldn't say. I would say that my passion sort of came out of all of these other elements where my strengths showed up. And so I got to show at a young age that I kind of knew what I was doing. And so that gives you some credibility. It gives you some affirmation. It enables you.
Right.
And then it feeds you. And it's like a sport or anything. You get better at a sport and start to move your way up the rankings. And all of a sudden, you and I talked about this the last time. I'm a huge tennis fan. The 100th best tennis player in the world breaks even. The 100th best tennis player on this planet makes no money.
Wow.
They pay their own way. They might have a small endorsement deal. They travel all over the world, coaches, trainers, nutrition, hotels. They make nothing. And, I would tell you that the 5,000th best banker in Toronto makes considerably more than break even. And so you got to weigh your odds on what is commerciality and what isn't. And so following your passion blindly, I think, also has some challenges.
Right.
So when I speak with my kids about it, it isn't about not finding passions, but don't assume that your passion is where you are going to actually earn your living, because sometimes they aren't perfectly aligned.
That's very well said. And it was also, you found like the classiest way of saying I make a lot of money for what I do. That's legitimate, like the best way.
Well, I don't know about that, but I've been really lucky, is what I would say. And good fortune is it's humbling when seen in the right light.
Well, it's nice to see with people like yourself who are so humble about it, and like I think you have the right relationship with the money, because some people, you see it's a little too much part of their personality. It's a little bit too much part of what they need to just put out into the world, and some people are really cool about it. And like one of our other clients, who's also a great friend, absolute salt of the earth kind of a guy, came from extremely humble beginnings, and he's supremely successful. Oddly enough, like you, he likes tennis, and sometimes he's afforded these incredible opportunities. He has some very beautiful, amazing vacations that he goes on, and one of these vacations he got to play, I think, the number 2 or 3 player of the world at the time, and so he was able to afford that opportunity and do it. But I feel like for those kinds of people that have that kind of a relationship, they end up like using the money in a really nice way, and like they have a healthy relationship with it. But I think that in and of itself is also a good conversation. And I mean, when you talk to your boys, for instance, and you tell them about the practicality of what they're pursuing, and enjoying it, and it being something that can potentially fuel their lives and whatnot. How much time do you actually spend on, okay, so now, because you are a wealth manager, how much time do you spend on what should they do with their money and their finances?
It's a great question. So my 4 sons are 17, 15, 13, and 9, and my 15-year-old has really gotten into it. So
is he managing your money, Peter?
He is not managing my money yet, but he's managing his own money, which I'm very proud of. He read The Intelligent Investor last summer, as I did when I was young, and it, I think, was very forming for him. He's a super curious, quick-witted guy, and he has found his way into investing. And I think the first 4 or 5 stocks we bought were at a point in time they plummeted almost the minute that he touched them, which is often the way it goes. And many of them have recovered, and he has sort of lived through the emotions of that and seeing his own money go down in value and then go up in value. I think it's been a very humbling experience. My 2 younger kids are curious about it, but we haven't done a whole lot yet. I do think that, everyone says start early, and I do think there is something about starting early, but we've done that more around a bank account and ensuring that they can actually see what their money is, and that, getting an allowance and watching the cash build up in your billfold does not work in the sense of how you grow money over time. And, the thing that we do talk a lot about is compounding, and we talk about it in almost everything. Learning compounds, money compounds, but it's this force multiplier, as you know. And the thing about compounding is it all comes at the end, because if you really do think not linearly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but exponentially 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, you start multiplying on these crazy numbers. And so the further you're willing to go, the more patient you are, the better the outcome.
Sure.
So for my kids, it's been more a lesson around that. My oldest son is off to computer engineering at McGill this fall, and cool. I'm really excited for him. And he is very much a math mind. We haven't done a lot of investing yet. We've talked a lot about it, but he's going to take some finance courses this fall as sort of subjects that will offset a little bit of what he's doing in terms of engineering. But I want to be open to all those conversations, not jam them down their throat. I want them to have a good, as you said, comfortable understanding of money, because they've done all these studies about money. And there's the biggest takeaway for me personally is this, and that is that money actually doesn't make you happier. And I know everyone says, oh, well, how could that be? But what it does do, which is way more important element, is that it removes a lot of unhappiness. So by default, It does make you happier. It removes the stresses, the strains, the deep concerns that money can bring. And I think that when you look at it through that lens, it's a means to an end. You can't take it with you.
It's a tool, yeah.
It's a tool. You want to share it with the people that you love as much as you can. You want to make sure that you're in a place where you're not having your hand out if you don't need to. But those are kind of the things that, I instill, or my wife and I instill in our kids.
It's, as you know, I don't have kids, but I'm very close to my nieces and nephews and spend a lot of time with them. And I'd love to get your take on, there's a bit of we live in a participation trophy kind of a world right
We
now.
sure do.
And I think, kids are way smarter and stronger than most people give them credit for, and they can handle being wrong and they can handle being criticized. And
Rejection.
and I think, if what you're making a great point about money and dealing with that early on and learning how to deal with that, but the same is true of other things. And sometimes there's a false sense of expectation set for these kids when they show up to a soccer field and they're given a trophy. It's not going to be the same. So how do you balance that sort of encouragement with the realities, the harsh realities? I find, and I'll end on this, and I want to hear your thoughts. I feel that I'm probably on the harsher side of the equation when it comes to an uncle. I'm certainly not the fun uncle, I'll tell you that much. I love them dearly and I try and be encouraging, but I would probably be considered a less than fun uncle to hang out with. But anyways, how do you balance that?
Well, look, my part of having the privilege of being able to get your kids in a strong education system, I think that there's a lot of core values that come with that, which are very important, similar core values that we try and work with and through every day at Grayhawk. But, I think when I talk about these things with my kids, I often joke. I think what they believe is that participation is an incredibly valuable thing and needs to be rewarded in a way far greater than it typically is in society. And that is hard to argue. I think a lot of people choose not to participate for the lack of reward or the lack of positive feedback loop that's supposed to make them feel better. So I do subscribe to that. Like you, I think the world is, I think we may have gone a little bit too far in terms of our accolades for things that have not really been, that worldly in terms of their accomplishment.
Right.
And I know it's supposed to motivate, but when everybody gets one, it feels less like motivation and feels a lot more like, you are actually in this group of people that is not rare air, but common air. And not that there's anything wrong with being in common air. It just is only to say that if you are striving, you are always trying to move forward. And I played competitive sports my whole life. I played competitive tennis and I played football for just under 9 years, American football. And, you learn a lot along the way. And the analogy I use about tennis is that it's empirical. You win or you lose. You're out there on your own and you move up the rankings or you move down the rankings. But there's no medal for moving up or down. There's only a medal for winning. And that might be the harshest extreme. When I think of football, football is this really interesting dynamic where I played quarterback for a long time. And one of the things about quarterback is you're pretty much the only person that plays the whole time on the field when you're obviously on offense. And so with that, it means that there might be one or two people that are behind you, backup quarterback, third string quarterback, and their job every week is to push you so that they one day get your job. And your job is to play your best throughout the week prior to the game so that you're prepared. And I think that there's a healthy tension. And then come Sunday or whatever the day is that the game is, everyone's job is to support whomever's on the field. And I think that that's a very, very good notion how great organizations work. And I define them as collaborative and competitive. And, we have, within Grayhawk ourselves, we've got lots of people that really see that element. And our job is to make sure that we're fostering an environment that allows for it to happen. And, we can always do so many things better. But having said that, I'm very optimistic that we're defining, core group of people that really see this as an opportunity to unify. And of course, this is a competitive world. It's a competitive business. How do we do that? And we know that there are very few accolades that support it other than the opportunity to, work with more families, help them in more meaningful ways, provide more purpose, whatever it might be.
That's awesome, Peter. And you have put all these principles to great use because Grayhawk is a great company and you guys have had tremendous success and I wish you ongoing success. You've been very gracious with your time generally and particularly today with coming and joining me here today. As you know, I've been involved with a number of universities over the past few years, and we've done a number of talks, various here and there. But I'm sure that a lot of the young adults out there that do keep in touch, that I'm fortunate to talk to, I think they will all benefit from the conversation we had today, and I appreciate you taking the time, and I think a lot of other people might will enjoy this as well. So thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you for the great books.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ali. Thank you. There's some good ones there that I know that you will enjoy.
I certainly will, and I really appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah,
Always.
me too.
Thank you,
so much. All the
Appreciate
best.
It.
Thank you very much. Cheers.